Idaho Matters podcast is brought to you by St. Luke's On-Demand Virtual Care, which allows patients to see a provider from their home using a computer or smartphone with on-demand care for common ailments, such as a cough, sore throat, or a sinus issue. More information at stlukesonline.org.
Boise State Public Radio News celebrates the Winter Olympiad in Milan Cortina. There are 232 U.S. Olympians this year competing in 116 events across 16 different sports. NPR is covering the games in Italy and giving context to the world event now through February 22nd. Learn more about what's new this year and follow Team USA with NPR's 2026 Winter Olympics coverage at boisestatepublicradio.org.
From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Gaudette. This is Idaho Matters. It's Friday, which means it's time for our Reporter Roundtable. We will spend the next hour getting you updated on the news that made headlines around our region this week. And today, our panel includes Logan Finney with Idaho Reports on Idaho Public Television, Nate Eaton, news director at eastidahonews.com, Laura Guido with the Idaho Capital Sun, Sarah Cutler with the Idaho Statesman, and Brian Clark, Idaho Statesman opinion writer. I want to welcome everyone to the show and get right into it. So let's begin with the fact that we are 6 weeks into the 2026 legislative session. And Logan, I want to start our conversation with you today because the main topic of conversation continues to be the budget. And in fact, earlier this week, Governor Little talked with reporters. I'm curious, Logan, what did he have to say about the budget shortfalls?
Sure thing, Gemma. So Governor Little came and joined the Idaho Press Club at the annual breakfast with the governor. Like you referenced, it's 6 weeks into the session. This is kind of a traditional period where the press corps checks in with the governor, who, of course, has the power to veto things or sign things, but is otherwise less involved in the legislative process. Especially the current governor, Brad Little, he is very hands-off with the legislative process. He typically will not indicate if he's even considering vetoing anything until it lands on his desk. As he likes to say, he's a former lawmaker and gives a lot of deference to the legislature. Over the summer, like we've talked about many times on the show, Little ordered 3% budget holdbacks to balance the budget and to keep those going on into the ongoing year to keep it balanced for 2027. Now that the legislature has taken that, they have added on to what the governor had already done and what the governor put in his proposed budget. They're asking for another 1% to be held back this year and an additional 2% to be cut from next year's budget. And those are in the budget bills that are making their way through the process, have come out of the Budget Writing Committee, the Joint Finance Appropriations Committee, or JFAC. Little is concerned about these ongoing cuts. He had agencies prepare plans for 2% and 4% and 6%, and his staff have told the press corps many times over the last month and a half, there's a reason we stopped at 3%. Once we get to 4% and 5%, they believe that we really start to see some lasting impacts. And a lot of those impacts are detailed in the materials that were provided to the Budget Committee as they were working on these projects.
So, Logan, did he mention when he says concerns about lasting impacts if they continue to cut? Did the governor say anything specific in regards to lasting impact or just a generalization of lasting impacts?
Well, for example, even though K through 12 schools are excluded from these holdbacks, higher education is not. And the colleges and universities are a really important part of our workforce pipeline that gets people going into the workforce generally, as well as specifically to medical school. We don't have a state medical school here in Idaho, but we do have an arrangement with neighboring states that's called the WWAMI program that's kind of run through the University of Idaho. We also have ICOM, the Idaho College of Osteopathic Medicine in Meridian. And if we don't have strong K through 12 schools and strong colleges and universities to prepare people to go to medical school, that's not going to help. That's not going to help the doctor shortage that we have been talking about for decades here in Idaho. We have a little bit of Governor Little's comments in the show this week at idahoreports.org, and we also discuss with Dr. Mary Baranaga, who is the assistant dean for Idaho WWAMI, along with Kevin Richert, our friend at Idaho Education News, and they discuss what these compounding effects could mean. Because we're not just looking at say these cuts individually in silos. You're cutting from the
Hmm.
community colleges, you're cutting from the colleges and universities, you're potentially cutting from the CTE programs, which funds some K through 12 programs, even though it's not technically the K through 12 budget. Lawmakers are pulling money out of the Idaho Launch piggy bank to try and balance things. Nearly everything is on the table, and Little and a lot of the administrators who we are talking to are very concerned that we have hit bone and are still cutting, and it's going to have lasting impacts far beyond this budget year.
And Logan, as you mentioned, the governor does have the ability to veto. He also has the ability to bring lawmakers back for a special session if necessary. Is this something that he's considering? I mean, given the concerns he has in regards to lasting consequences of continued budget cuts.
He didn't make any firm commitments in the roughly hour-long conversation with the press corps on Tuesday. However, he did reflect on kind of the rhythms of the legislative process. Once a bill makes it to his desk, specifically the budget bills are very complex. It takes a lot of work to get them together, both on the lawmakers' part and on their staff part, just getting all the spreadsheets in order to make all these budgets make sense. And so he says if he vetoes something like one of these big maintenance bills where he doesn't like the additional 1% or 2% cuts that are baked in, that adds another 2%, another possibly 2 weeks of work onto the legislative session. And we are in an election year. As we're speaking on Friday here, next week is
Hmm.
the campaign filing window where all these lawmakers, as well as state officials like Governor Little, will be filing to run again for re-election or to face challengers in the next election. And so he recognizes, like every other year, where an election is coming up, the lawmakers will be antsy to get home. And so if legislative leadership decides to slow walk these bills and wait until all of the rank and file members are itching to get home, they'll have a lot more motivation to be willing to override the governor's veto. And this is the situation that Little spelled out. We were a little surprised afterward that, we asked Little what his plans were, and he basically laid out a way to beat him
Hmm.
in this game. And that sounds a little off the cuff. It is more serious than the game of politics.
Yeah.
We're talking about programs that affect people's lives here.
All right. Well, appreciate all of that updating, Logan. And Sarah, during this hour long conversation at the press club with reporters, the governor also answered questions about immigration enforcement. And it seems that he is striking a more cautious tone on immigration enforcement as recent federal arrests raise new questions here in our state. And I know that one of your colleagues usually does quite a bit of the immigration reporting, but I wanted to talk with you a little bit about this as well. And do we have any idea as to why we're seeing a bit of a change in the governor's tone?
Yeah, well, I'll say first that I guess I would say it was a subtle shift in messaging in some ways. We've seen the governor be pretty supportive of immigration enforcement in the state. For example, after the raid of a gambling operation in Wilder last fall that led to several immigration-related arrests, he was quick to put out a statement supporting the operation. But during the conversation with reporters this week, he mentioned that operations like the recent arrest of a father outside of his child's daycare were, quote, not my preference. And he didn't specify exactly what he meant by that, though he noted his priority has been to get, quote, dangerous criminals out of the state.
Mm.
He also voiced some concerns about reporting nationwide that ICE was violating people's due process. To your question about why the tone has shifted, I could only speculate that it may have been, a response to some of the national attention we've seen on immigration enforcement in Chicago, Minneapolis, around the country. But the governor didn't offer a reason or even really acknowledge that there was a shift in perspective. This was just sort of subtle differences that we wanted to capture since it was the first time we'd heard him express some of these sentiments.
Hmm. So, Sarah, do we know? And the answer might be we don't know, but do we know how closely the state of Idaho is coordinating with federal immigration authorities? And I guess who ultimately decides when and where an arrest happened? Because as you mentioned, there was a father arrested outside of the preschool in Boise where he was dropping his child off.
So I'd say the short answer is I don't think that we have a ton of insight into that. We did
Hmm.
after the specifically that raid in Wilder a few months back, we did speak with a former FBI agent who was not involved in that operation, but he did walk us through a bit of how operations like that one, which was fairly large scale, typically work. And in that case, it was a task force model, and he noted that who takes the lead in different operations may depend on, for example, are there criminal concerns separate from immigration concerns that might affect which agencies get involved. So, I hate to give an it depends answer, but I think my answer may be some combination of it depends on the circumstance, and I don't think we have a ton of
Mhm.
insight into that.
Yeah, and I know that the Idaho Statesman reporting has also found few violent offenders among folks who have been transferred to immigration detention centers. And all we have to do is look at polling across the nation to know that most Americans are on board and agree with the fact that okay, if violent criminals should be deported. But what does the reporting that the Statesman has done? What does that suggest about how? I guess this partnership, right, with the state is working in practice.
Yeah, great question. I think, the governor has vocally said the comments I mentioned earlier, that his focus has been on trying to get, quote, dangerous criminals out of the state. But this deep dive that my teammates did dug into the backgrounds of 50 or so people that the governor's office had said in a previous release were being transferred into immigration detention after completing criminal sentences. And in that reporting, my teammates found that only about five of those people had actually been convicted of violent crimes. Much more common were folks that had been convicted of, or even in some cases, just charged with driving under the influence, a very common, charge.
Mm.
At that time, the governor's office didn't respond to questions about this and simply reiterated that the partnership was working to remove dangerous illegal alien criminals. That's a quote from Idaho, but they didn't directly address the issue that it looks like many of these folks are, don't really fit that bill.
And Logan, I'd love for you to jump in here as well and give some perspective because Idaho Public Television, you guys have recently interviewed the executive director of the ACLU of Idaho. So talk to us a little bit about what the ACLU is saying and responding to immigration enforcement here in Idaho.
Certainly. The ACLU of Idaho has filed a proposed class action lawsuit specifically over the actions that were taken by enforcement in Wilder. Like we talked about, the Wilder incident, the Wilder raid was a coordinated effort between federal agents, Idaho State Police, Canyon County Sheriff's Office, as well as I believe the Nampa and Caldwell police departments. The ACLU of Idaho's class action lawsuit alleges that the 400-ish people who were at this event were detained solely on the basis of their ethnicity, the color of their skin, not any actual evidence that they were in the country illegally or doing any sort of illegal conduct. I spoke with the executive director, Leo Morales. That conversation is on the Idaho Reports podcast this week. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts, like this one. And he detailed some of the items in the class action lawsuit. For example, one of the attendees who is ethnically white but a little bit darker skinned visually, the lawsuit alleges that some of the law enforcement officials didn't believe him when he said he was a legal citizen and didn't speak Spanish, and then when he repeatedly did not understand the orders they were giving him in Spanish, one of the officers struck him with the butt of a rifle. And that is just one of many examples of these 400 or so people who were detained for multiple hours without any sort of medical care, any sort of food or water or place to use the bathroom. So the ACLU of Idaho is challenging this and hoping to get a declaratory judgment from the courts. Even though they're challenging an action here in Idaho, if it went up to the Ninth Circuit or Supreme Court, it could have nationwide implications.
And Logan, do we know then exactly where this class action suit is then right now, and what happens next?
It is before the court. It is a putative lawsuit. So the way class action works is the ACLU has three specific families as plaintiffs who have specific harms in this case, but they also want the ruling to apply to the whole broad class of people. And this is the way they have to do this. This is kind of in the weeds, but recently the U.S. Supreme Court within the last couple of years made it so that lower courts can't do what were called these sweeping nationwide injunctions. So one of the lower courts no longer has the power to just say you, ICE, are not allowed to do this in this state. They actually have to go through the older process of getting a class action lawsuit certified and moving forward. So it is a slower process. It is a more involved process. We hope to speak with one or two of the plaintiffs on Idaho Reports in the near future if we're able to.
So, a bill to narrow the definition of medical neglect is sparking debate over parental rights and how far the state of Idaho should go to protect children. Sarah, can you talk to us about this bill and what problem? I believe it was Representative Lucas Kaler says that he was trying to solve by bringing this bill forward. And then I guess let's start there because I'm asking you a lot of questions. So let's start there. What problem was he trying to solve?
Sure, no problem. So yeah, in Idaho, it is a felony to neglect to provide medical care to a child. But this proposal, and you're right, it was brought by Representative Kaler from Caldwell. He sought to narrow the definition of what counts as medical neglect, basically saying, for example, that you could take a child to a quote alternative provider, let's just say a Reiki healer instead of an oncologist, and that would count as providing medical care to that child. You would not be considered neglectful. And the reason for that, the sponsor said he was concerned that the current state law allowed for false or overblown reports of neglect. He said he has received complaints or has heard of cases in which a child maybe has like diaper rash or a runny nose that could result in children being taken away from their families. So he was trying to, I guess, narrow the parameters of circumstances in which that could happen. Yeah, I'll start there.
So, okay. So then let's talk about child welfare advocates, because how did child welfare advocates and lawmakers, in particular, Representative Megan Egbert, how did they respond to concerns about limiting investigations into possible neglect?
So there was the committee was divided, but there was a lot of concern on this on a few different points. The first thing I'll note is that folks, including Representative Egbert, mentioned that they were concerned that the bill didn't define that idea of alternative care. Who counts as an alternative provider? What kind of a training do they need to have? They felt that that was overly broad. And I think Representative Egbert said, I could bring a child to my uncle, and that might count. There, this really isn't defining what we mean here. She also noted she has served as like a volunteer advocate for children in courts who are in the foster system. Mm-hmm. And she said in her experience, our current system is already, I would say, under-responsive to concerns of abuse and neglect. She actually mentioned a case in which I think it took over 30 calls to health and welfare to get them to start investigating. So I think there was concern about further restricting reporting or just doing something that might disincentivize reporting and make people concerned about reporting, given how hard it already can be.
So, Sarah, were there any unanswered questions or gaps in this proposal that seemed to possibly trouble committee members the most because they ultimately hesitated to move this bill forward?
Yeah, so other than the one I mentioned about, the lack of a definition on what we mean by alternative providers, one of the big ones was that I believe the bill basically said that as long as parents eventually or at some point brought their child to a care provider, it wouldn't matter how long they had waited. And so Representative Alana Rubel, a Boise Democrat, said that she was worried the bill gave parents a get out of jail free card, that, they could have let an injury fester basically for months. But as long as they eventually went to a doctor, that would kind of wipe the record clean. So I think that the lack of definition around that as well was concerning for people.
So bottom line, Sarah, where does that bill stand now?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, so the bill, this was only an introductory hearing. Typically, these are kind of cursory. Mm-hmm. There's kind of a bias towards, let's get things printed and let them have a full hearing. In this case, actually, the proposal to print it died with a tie vote. So the committee was divided and the bill will not be printed. That doesn't mean that the sponsor couldn't say, make tweaks and bring back an alternate version, but this version is dead, I would say, for now.
Okay. Nate, a Boise area abuse case has left some alleged victims without a trial and without the chance to confront the doctor that they say harmed them because the person who was accused actually died before going to court. I know this is a hard topic to talk about, and I do want our listeners to know we are going to be talking about abuse right now. But Nate, for listeners who haven't followed this case, who was Dr. Richard Pines and how did these allegations first come to light?
Yeah, this is a very heavy traumatic topic for these victims. He was a well-known psychiatrist in the Boise area. He worked with the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare. This is early 90s. He also worked with the Ada School District, was highly respected. And what many did not know, at least publicly, is that he was sexually abusing boys, all boys, many, many, many boys over the years. And it came to light a couple of different ways, basically victims coming forward, and it's kind of a long, complicated story in the fact that his license, the Idaho Medical Board was told of these allegations in the 90s. They did an investigation. They did find that he had sexually abused a couple of patients, and they pulled his medical license, but he was never charged. And then that started a series of events over the next few years that ultimately led to where it was supposed to go to trial just a few weeks ago.
Okay, so Nate, what impact did Pine's death then have on the victims who, I mean, they were preparing to testify? Not just that. I mean, I would think that they wanted some type of accountability through this upcoming trial.
Oh, without a doubt. And these are ultimately the prosecutor did get enough to testify, but these were potentially dozens of victims, pages is what I was told, pages and pages of victims, and all of these boys were in the foster care system, and they already came from broken homes, from vulnerable situations, and so the prosecutor, the Attorney General's office, tracked down all of these victims. Many of them did not want to participate. They had moved on. They were done with it. But some did, and some actually looked forward to testifying. They prepared victim impact statements. They were able to finally come face to face with the man who had done these things to them years ago as they were children, and they wanted to see him in court. He never served more than a few days in jail as he was able to bond out when he was finally criminally charged. And that never happened because he passed away in the fall of last year.
And Nate, as you mentioned, all of these victims were in the foster care system when this abuse happened. Your reporting really highlighted gaps in the foster care oversight at the time. What failures did you find that allowed this situation, I mean, Nate, to continue for as long as it did?
Well, back then there was really no procedure or policies in place for these foster care kids to leave their foster homes. What this doctor was doing is he would give respite care to the families. So let's say you're a foster parent and you need to go away for the weekend, but you can't take your foster child. Dr. Pines would come forward and say, why don't they come with me? I have a cabin. We'll go up to the cabin. They can spend a weekend. We'll play in the woods. It'll be a lot of fun. The Department of Health and Welfare was fine with that at the time. They didn't have any sort of paperwork to document when these boys were going with him, who was going with him. They believed that they could trust him. So it was a very, very casual relationship. Sometimes these boys would go for a week with the doctor. Sometimes it was overnight. It really was no checks and balances at all. And that has since changed now. That has changed. And the prosecutor that I interviewed who, took this case on said that now there are much more firm procedures in place that the foster children are accounted for at all times, not just when they're in one foster home going to another. And hopefully things have improved since the 90s when all of this happened.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Nate. I mean, if anything, I mean, has changed when it comes to Idaho's foster care or our licensing systems. Were you able to uncover anything, to help prevent something similar from happening again?
Well, I think hopefully, as a society in general, things have changed too since then. Especially with young boys, and many of the victims I spoke with say that they still feel that there is a stigma when it comes to sexual abuse with boys and men. They're embarrassed. They don't want to talk about it, and these men finally got the courage to speak up and say something. And the reason that they decided to speak and share their stories is to encourage others who are in similar situations, that it doesn't matter. This was a doctor that everybody loved and
Mm-hmm.
respected. Apparently, it doesn't matter who they are, what their position are, that you still could these people still could violate trust with children. So yes, as far as what's been in place, the Department of Health and Welfare now tracks these things where the foster children are, and I think hopefully the experts trust kids more when they come forward. One of the young men that I spoke with, who's now in his 30s, he did report after he got back from this doctor's cabin. He was in a lot of pain, and he reported it, and no one believed him. I mean, I don't want to get graphic. He couldn't sit down at school. He was sent to the principal's
Mm-hmm.
office and he didn't know what was wrong. And so hopefully adults now can believe more of these victims and prevent things like this from happening again.
Well, Nate, appreciate your reporting on this, and I know it's not probably enough for these victims, but hopefully they will at least find some type of peace, right, with at least the death of this individual. So there is new polling out suggesting that Christian nationalism has a growing political presence here in Idaho, even though most Idahoans don't actually support it. So, Brian, for listeners who haven't read your opinion piece yet, how does the report define Christian nationalism, and how widespread is support for it nationally versus here in Idaho?
So the report measures whether people are Christian national supporters or or adherents by asking them a series of questions, including whether the United States government should declare Christianity the official religion of the country, whether laws should be based on Christianity, whether if the country were to move away from Christianity, that would sort of be the end of the country, and whether Christians are supposed to exercise dominion over all areas of American society. The Overall, nationwide, about a third of people express some level of support for this set of views, which is rather higher than many people
Mm-hmm.
might think. Um, in Idaho, it's fairly similar to that. About 39% of people overall express some level of support for these beliefs, though the number of truly hardcore supporters is more like one in seven, 1 in 8. It's about 14% of Idahoans.
So, Brian, you argue the movement has outsized political influence despite, the minority support. So, how is that showing up here in our state when it comes to policy making right now?
So two of the most prominent ways this year would be the bill that has already passed the House to ban state non-discrimination ordinances, and another would be the bathroom bill that bans transgender people from using the bathroom that aligns with their gender identity in private businesses. Um, these are both laws that have been heavily lobbied for by the Idaho Family Policy Center, which the head of that organization has explicitly described himself as a Christian nationalist. Um, and a variety of the most contentious laws that have passed through the Idaho legislature over the last 5, 6 years have been authored and heavily lobbied for by this group, despite little evidence that it actually has popular support that's very broad. Um, it should be said that although, about 39% of people express some level of support, more people
Mhm.
express opposition to this set of ideas, even in very conservative Idaho, than express support for them.
So, Brian, what did the data reveal then about who is and is not likely to support these Christian nationalist ideas?
So there are a variety of ways that it's broken down, but perhaps the most interesting is that Christian nationalist ideas seem to be heavily concentrated among evangelical churches, particularly white evangelical churches, but also Hispanic evangelical churches. They're much less common in mainline Protestant churches, as well as Catholic and Orthodox churches, and they're almost non-existent among other religious groups.
And Brian, you ended your article on actually, I would say a cautious note of optimism. What makes you think its influence can be challenged or reduced moving forward?
Yeah, I think it's important to look at the numbers in context. So there are areas of the country where the level of support is much higher, where a majority of the population expresses support for these ideas, which isn't true in Idaho. Um, so it is kind of strange that Idaho's kind of become the testing ground for a lot of these ideas. They've had a lot of political traction in ways that they haven't even in some states in the Bible Belt. What all of that suggests to me is that the real strength of Christian nationalism in Idaho really has to do with its political organizing and with its lobbying capability, not with its popular support. It's a much harder thing to do to get people to change their minds if they already support a set of ideas. If this is really just a matter of political organizing, of being more effective in lobbying, that's a much more achievable aim. And I think that people who are uh, who support religious freedom, pluralism, tolerance rather than persecution, ought to start standing up for these ideas more forcefully, because that's most of Idaho.
Appreciate that reporting on that, Brian. Laura, an Idaho teen's experience calling the 988 crisis hotline is raising some concerns about how a parental consent law here in Idaho may be limiting mental health support for young people. So, again, for our listeners who were just hearing about this for the first time, how did Idaho's parental consent law end up affecting calls to the 988 suicide and crisis hotline?
Yeah, so it was passed in 2024. Folks have been dealing with this for a little over a year and a half now. And basically, the law pretty much made it so any type of medical intervention required parental consent if it was to a patient 18 or younger than 18. There's narrow exceptions to prevent the death of the child or in like very certain circumstances where the parent is under investigation for abuse towards the child. But basically, how this is affecting the hotline is that really high standard of preventing the death of the child is not necessarily the case in every call. And folks like this teenager that called are finding that if you're not really at that tipping point, the 988 isn't able to continue that call.
Okay, so let's talk about this young person. His name is Chase Woods. What happened when he reached out for help, and how common, I guess, is his experience, if we know, among teens here in Idaho?
Yeah, Jace, he's 15 and he called when it was late one night, and he basically said he just really needed someone to talk to. When he called, he gave some information to the operator, and they pretty much told him, like, if you don't have parental consent right now, we can't move forward with this call. We have to end it. And he says that multiple of people he knows, this has happened to them as well. We don't have like exact data on how many people this has happened to. I think when I reported on this issue in August, about more than 1,500 young people, between the ages of 5 and 17 had contacted the hotline at that point since that law was passed. But not all of those kids had to have the call end. Like it's kind of a nuanced issue.
Mm-hmm. So lawmakers, Laura, are saying that a fix might be coming. So what changes are being proposed, and would those address this problem?
Yeah, last year, one of the sponsors, Senator Kelly Anthony, did propose a bill to change some of the wording and clarify that the hotline can continue its operations without parental consent, that there are some other issues that have come up regarding like rape kits for children whose family members might be involved, and some other issues where emergencies were happening that weren't like life threatening, but were still emergencies.
Mhm.
So that went forward in the Senate last year. It didn't go anywhere in the House. This year, it's supposed to start in the House, is what I'm told. Representative Barbara Ehart said she's working on something right now. She's in the process of getting bill drafted, but I haven't seen the exact language yet. But she has said that it should address these concerns that have popped up since it was passed in 2024.
All right. Nate, hundreds of jobs in Pocatello could be at risk. There's a local semiconductor plant that's warning it might shut down if they can't find a buyer. So, what exactly is happening at this semiconductor facility, and why are these layoffs now a possibility?
Well, this is LA Semiconductor. It's been in the Pocatello area under different names since 1970. So this has been a long time institution in Pocatello. Basically, this company was bought out, went through leadership changes, new owners a couple of years ago, and they were trying to get things, set and good to go for the next coming years. But it sounds like that they weren't able to reach any sort of agreement with the new owners, and there's been some legal issues. And it could potentially, LI Semiconductor could be shuttered within the next 2 months or so.
Oh wow. Okay, so Nate, um, there was a warn notice. So tell us about what you found out in regards to the company's timeline and the chances that the plant could actually not shut down.
So a WARN notice, that stands for Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act. This is a federal notice that is required for large employers if they believe that there will be major layoffs or plant closures. They have to give employees at least 60 days notice to let them know that this could be
Mm.
happening. We got a copy of the WARN notice through the Idaho Department of Labor, along with some other people that sent them to us who got them. This was the LA Semiconductor notified the Department of Labor on February 9th, earlier this year, or this month, that they might be shutting down. So this went out, and they said that if they cannot get a new buyer, if they can't get someone to take over their current business structure, then they will have to close the facility and permanently lay off around 350 employees by April 10th.
So Nate, we're talking 350 employees, as you said. What kind of impact could this facility, if it shuts down, what kind of economic impact could it have in Pocatello?
Well, for Pocatello, it is one of Pocatello's largest employers. You've got ISU, which
Mm.
is likely the largest, but LI Semiconductor is big, and I know some people might think, oh, it's only 350 people, but that's 350 families in a
Mm.
community in eastern Idaho. And because it's been such a part of East Idaho history, it's been such a part of Pocatello history that if they were to close down, you'd also have buildings that are left empty and infrastructure there that just kind of goes vacant. So many people are hoping that a buyer does come through, that they're able to save these jobs and maybe potentially hire more and get a company that is able to grow.
So Idaho lawmakers are moving forward with a bill that would require government agency and some large contractors to use the federal E-Verify system to check workers' legal status. So Laura, for listeners new to this topic, what exactly would this E-Verify bill require, and who would be affected first?
Yeah, local government and state government, which the state government is already doing this, but they would now have to, under the law, have to use E-Verify, which pretty much checks documentation, makes sure that people are authorized to work in the U.S. either as a citizen or if they have a temporary work visa, anything like that, to make sure that they're legally allowed to work in the U.S. And it would
Okay,
affect,
go ahead.
large companies
No, go ahead.
that contract with governments. So anyone with
Mm.
over 150 employees, valued at over $100,000, they would have to make sure that they're using this program as well when they hire.
Okay, so Laura, here's what I found interesting. Lawmakers from both parties voted against it. So what were the main concerns that were raised during the Senate debate?
It's kind of mixed. It's an interesting issue. Senator Ben Adams made the point that he thinks that because E-Verify can kind of be tricked, so to say, like you can, if you use documents from someone who does exist, who is authorized to work, then it'll work. It'll clear you. He's saying doing something like this would be almost encouraging identity theft. There's other people who want more strict requirements, but still supported it because it's something. And then there's others who don't think we should be requiring E-Verify. They just think it's a burdensome hurdle. And it also could be disruptive to some industries that frankly rely on undocumented workers.
So, Laura, how does this current proposal fit into the broader push this session for tougher employment and immigration enforcement laws here in our state?
This was described as like almost like warming up the engine, is what the bill sponsor called it. Kind of easing into the waters of requiring E-Verify, because there's been this strong push from other members in the Republican Party to do much more broad requirements, requiring all employers in the state to use it, or all larger employers. And even there was even a bill proposed this year to make it a crime, like a misdemeanor crime, to hire undocumented workers or continue to employ undocumented workers once you found out that they were. And they were saying, you could use E-Verify as an affirmative defense under prosecution. There was another bill to prohibit it for all businesses, but it would use the Attorney General as an enforcement mechanism, basically saying that he could sue private businesses that are not using it and are hiring undocumented workers.
So where does the bill stand right now?
The Senate passed it this week pretty easily, and now it goes to a House committee where the House is actually where those other proposals are too. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of the House.
Okay, appreciate that update. Well, the Olympics are wrapping up on Sunday. However, there's still a lot of sports to watch as the Simplot Games are returning to Pocatello this week. They are going to bring thousands of young athletes and two Olympic champions who actually met at this event. So, Nate, for folks who may not know, what are the Simplot Games? And why? Then they're a big deal for high school athletes.
Yeah, big deal. I did not know this, Gemma, but they have athletes this year coming as far away as Australia. So
wow.
many are from Idaho, many are from other states in the Intermountain West, but they come from across the country. I guess you could call it kind of like a mini Olympics. They compete in all sorts of track and field events, hurdling, all sorts of different sporting events. They do an opening ceremonies where they get to walk out across the. It's held at ISU. At the everybody knows it as Holt Arena, but it's now the ICCU Dome. And it's a big event. It goes for 3 days. Thousands of athletes, their families come. They're able to set records. And as you mentioned, there's a couple there, kind of the keynote athletes this year who actually met and fell in love and are now married and have competed in the Olympics and the Paralympics and are just really impressive athletes.
Yeah, we're talking about Tara and Hunter Woodhall. And if folks watch the Paris Olympics, you saw them. I mean, they are incredible athletes. And so, Nate, as you said, I've only got about less than 2 minutes left with you. They're going to be there this weekend. I mean, they literally met at this event. But beyond, the really elite guests, what can the community expect from the competition and the events happening this weekend?
It's fun if you're in the area to just go watch it. I mean, you get to see these young athletes in their teenage years who come from some really remote areas, some small towns, some small high schools, who are able to go and compete at a really big event that often will lead from here to the Olympics Games or to other bigger competitions. It is impressive. You mentioned Hunter and Tara, the married couple. Hunter's a bilateral amputee sprinter, so he runs on kind of the hook legs
Mhm.
that he's able to attach, and it's just amazing to watch him run. And then she has competed in long jumping and has set some records, I believe, and then went on to win gold at last year's or the 2024 Olympics and championships. So the athletes will get to meet them, the public will get to meet them, and it's just a really fun event for people to go and watch. It's at ISU the tomorrow it's the finals, and then today it's the qualifying event, and then they do a big parade of athletes on Saturday when they wrap things up.
Well, I love that. And I want to thank all of our reporters for joining us today. Big thank you to Logan Finney from Idaho Public Television, Nate Eaton with EastIdahoNews.com, Laura Guido with the Idaho Capital Sun, Sarah Cutler with the Idaho Statesman, and Brian Clark, the Idaho Statesman opinion writer. And that'll do it for this episode of Idaho Matters. Thanks so much for listening. And just a reminder, you can find all of our episodes wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi, it's Terry Gross, host of Fresh Air. Hey, take a break from the 24-hour news cycle with us and listen to long-form interviews with your favorite authors, actors, filmmakers, comedians, and musicians, the people making the art that nourishes us and speaks to our times. So listen to the Fresh Air podcast from NPR and WHYY.